Hello everyone, and welcome to a new series, one focused on fantasy, storytelling, and world building. I play a lot of tabletop RPGs, and I'm also an avid fan of fantasy literature, and one of the things that I always admired about some of the series is their attention to detail in the world and how they operate. So that's what this series is going to be about, building my own detailed fantasy world. What is this going to be used for? I have no idea. I could use this for a homebrew campaign setting, or maybe even as the foundation for a novel to come out 20 years from now. But all things must start somewhere, and this time we're focusing on the most basic of things, the landmass. Now, I'm not just going to jump in and put lines on a piece of paper and call it a day. No, I'm going to look at some fantasy worlds that pique my interest and see if I can learn anything from them. Most of these are going to be worlds from the realm of novels, as I'm a lot more familiar with the likes of them. And we're going to be looking at 4 worlds to start with, so let's dive right in. The Wheel of Time is a series of 13 novels started by Robert Jordan and finished by Brandon Sanderson after Jordan's death. It is also a series I have not yet finished reading at the time of this recording. Look, 13 novels is a lot to get through. While the series does have a full world, I will be focusing more on the Westlands, where the first novel takes place. Most of this continent is a fairly typical Plains-like area, rolling fields, forests, and the like. But, once you get a bit further north, you get into the Blight, and this is the first thing to note, is how it's divided. The Blight is separated from the main continent by the Mountains of Dahum. This part of the world takes up a good chunk of the last pages, especially the climax of the first novel. So, to take some notes from here, the main part of the continent has a fairly similar feel to the topography, and the fact that there's a part of the world blocked off by some sort of natural formation. A Song of Ice and Fire, or Game of Thrones for those of you more familiar with the HBO show, is one of the few worlds that focuses on multiple continents, though it is only 2. It's also an incredibly detailed world with a rich political system, and also dragons. Yeah, people like the dragons, but let's look at how the continents are divided. Westeros is the main setting of the series, where the 7 houses vie for power in the Game of Thrones, and because of this, it's the more detailed part. Just like the Westlands of the Wheel of Time, part of the continent is sectioned off by a large, nigh-uncrossable area steeped in the world's lore. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. But the more interesting thing is the existence of Essos, a separate continent that's political structure is different than that of Westeros. Whereas Westeros is governed under a single body, at least at the start, Essos is composed mostly of free cities that operate individually with only a sparse few kingdoms that exist either in the past or currently. One of the key things to note in this map is how the areas change as you travel along the continent. The north is an icy and desolate place, whereas the further south you travel, you get to marshlands and generally more temperate environments. I think that's the key thing to take away from this world. What can be said of Middle-earth that hasn't already been said? It's one of the most iconic fantasy worlds in existence, practically becoming a part of modern mythology. It's what so many fantasy writers strive to create. But nobody goes into as much detail as Tolkien did. His world is filled with detailed mythological hierarchies and multiple historic ages. But we're not here to talk about that today. Rather, I just want to look at the map. First is the fact that, like the worlds before it, part of Middle-earth has a section, heavily involved in the story, blocked off by a natural land formation, that being Mount Doom. What is the deal with fantasy writers doing that? But the majority of the action at the end of the Third Age is relegated to a single continent. Lord of the Rings will be looked at in much more extensive detail as we move along. Much of its topography is also fairly similar to itself. There are locations such as the Elven city of Rivendell being a much more lush location than the likes of, say, Helm's Deep. And a large portion of this is due to the inspiration behind the series being rooted in the folklore of nations, with 1 or 2 major topographies, so the story is never really ventured to varied locales. The First Law trilogy is the only series that I've yet to start reading on this list. I own the first novel, I just haven't sat down to read it. 500-page fantasy novels take a while, okay? So we're just going to be looking at the continent itself. And the Circle of the World, as it's called, is different in that there's no obvious part of the world that stands as being important to the plot. I could be wrong once I read the book, but this is basically a glance. Unusually, it is a series of continents actually separated by bodies of water. I don't have much to say of this as I really don't know much of the world, so I couldn't tell you of its topography or plot details regarding certain locations. So that's all there is on this one. Anyway, let's move on to making the continent now. Welcome everyone to the land that, at least for now, is known as Lumerma. This is merely a single continent in this world, the starting location for something bigger. None of them have names yet, but I do plan to do further videos exploring each major region's culture, inhabitants, and history, so this shall be brief. In the far southeast lands, there exists a volcano. Its eruptions cover the ground in soot and block out the sun. Its inhabitants live far away from each other in the few inhabitable places. Moving westward, we run into a desert that spans a large chunk of the southern and central continent. The people here live nomadic lives, traveling between the scant few water sources. Moving north, you come to the icy tundras. These barren lands house a large number of people. However, communication between the islands and the mainlands is scarce. In the center of the continent lies a large mountain range, splitting the eastern and western halves. 2 rivers run from the highest peak, one leading to the sea, and the other leading into a lake at the base of the mountain. Just north of the Ashlands stands a dense jungle. It holds many of the secrets from the old world, but many refuse to step foot inside. And north of that is the last part of the map, an unknown location. Blocked by a compact series of mountains, few have traveled inside, and no one has ever returned. Now there exists a continent, just a small fraction of the work that needs to be done, but this is merely the beginning. So, please feel free to leave comments below with your thoughts on what to do next, or ideas for different groups or characters. Next time, we divide land amongst the various factions.